So welcome everybody on the next webinar from agilelabs.pl, the place when we can experiment in the agile way. And today we were lucky to invite Louis-Philippe, who will share his wide knowledge and experience from implementing metrics in Scrum teams. So Louis-Philippe, please.
Thank you for the introduction, Pavel, and also for Marcin for hosting this event. And thank you for everybody to join. And I hope that my experience, my failures, can help you avoid the same failures when I was applying flow metrics in Kanban. That's really the point. If I can help you learn from my mistakes and you don't repeat them, well, it's all fine and dandy for you folks. Who am I? Well, I'm Louis-Philippe Carignan. You can just go by Louis. I just go by Louis. And who am I professionally? Well, I've been a Scrum trainer since 2010, and I've been doing Agile consulting for about 15 years. And I think I became a pro Kanban trainer in 2020, just after the inception or the creation of pro Kanban. And I'm also the founder of PaceMkr, which is a tool to visualize and analyze flow metrics. And I really have to say before we move forward that I'm really standing on the shoulders of giants when I'm going to talk about flow metrics. People like Daniel Vacanti, Yuval Yaret, all of these folks in the Kanban community, I'm grateful that they could share their knowledge with me. And what I've been applying in Scrum is just their knowledge in my environment. So what I find really interesting, and I want to start everybody with this, is when I look at the 15th or the annual state of Agile, when I look at flow metrics, it's never in there. You know, if you look at what we're seeing right now, my screen is right here on the right side of me, is we're seeing that people are using Kanban. 61% of Agile teams who have answered that report say that they're using Kanban. And then if we're looking at the planning and delivery tools that they are using, the first technique at the top is a Kanban board at 77%. So this is like, oh, this is awesome for me. I mean, people should know about flow metrics and throughput and Monte Carlo simulation. And then I go into consulting, I meet clients. None of them know this. It's really basic steps for me. I don't know in Poland, but for me in Canada, it's basic steps to introduce them of what is the value of flow metrics to solve specific problem in their cultures and their organizations. So this is kind of weird for me. People are voting Kanban and Kanban board for planning, but maybe in that survey, and we'll talk about it at the end, maybe that survey is not asking the right questions in regards to flow metrics. So this is our first introduction to Mentimeter. I'm going to poll you folks along the way. So I'm going to ask you folks, what is your level of experience with flow metrics? And the way that we're going to do this is if you go on your cell phone or you open up a tab in Chrome, you can type in on that screen on menti.com, you can type in the code that you're seeing on the screen that I'm sharing. And once you get in there on your mobile, you'll be able to answer my first question in my quiz here. So it's just a little way of polling the audience about their knowledge of flow metrics. So right now, I'm kind of going to do the animation while people are logging in. There are 3 people that are logging in now, almost 4. So I'll give about 30 seconds so that people can go on menti.com and just give me your sense or your level of experience with flow metrics. I'm looking at our Zoom call. We're about, I'm going to say 15 or 20. So when I'll get around 10 votes, half of the people, I will have maybe the attention of about half of our crowd, which is always good. All right, so we're kind of seeing something that is similar to what I'm seeing in my market. The blue bar, the majority of people have not heard about them yet. Some of them have heard about them but haven't used them. Some of them tried, and like 10% of the people are using them. And I'd love to hear more about these people because I find that they're a game changer inside of Scrum. Just before we talk about how game changer they are, Let's just go back to flow metrics 101. What are they? Well, there are 4 flow metrics. The first one is the WIP, the work in progress, which is the number of work items started but not finished. Throughput, which is the number of work items finished per unit of time. So this could be per week, per day, or even per month if you're talking about projects or epics. And it's always the exact count of completed item. And let's not forget, this is not going to be the same as velocity, which is story points per sprint. Throughput is really talking about items being completed. So this can be bugs, stories, user stories, requirements, whatever unit of value that you're tracking. Our third metric is going to be the work item age, which is the amount of elapsed time between when a work item has started and today and the current time. And I'm going to just quote a lot of Kanban practitioners out there. I'm also using a lot of the work item age now to track my work instead of tracking the WIP or the WIP limit on each column. I can't say enough how that work item age has been useful for me. And I use it also with the cycle time / service level expectation. So the cycle time in our talk here will be the amount of elapsed time between when a work item has started all the way to the time that it has finished. And notice also that the age and cycle time is always counted in elapsed days. So that's going to be calendar days and not business days. And we won't go into the details of that in this talk, but just keep in mind that when I talk about them, it's always in elapsed days or calendar days. So a new question for the audience. What are you trying to solve with flow metrics? If you've heard about them or if you have heard about them, I'm going to invite you to go back to your menti.com and type in, what did you try to solve with them? Or if you've tried them, what were you trying to solve? Or if you're in this conference and you're kind of curious, is there a problem that you're trying to solve? And what I'm saying is maybe of help for you. So I'll give everybody a minute. This is going to be a little bit longer to enter an answer. But I'd like to poll the audience to know, what are you folks trying to solve with flow metrics? So our first answer is there's maybe too much task in progress at once. Long lead time, long cycle time. Let's improve predictability, increase focus, show how fast we can solve an issue. Okay. Transparency, yes. So somebody has seen my slides before this talk. We want to increase the alert value, can show where flow is blocked. Most of the work closed in the second week of the sprint. Wow, that's awesome. And what I like about those answers is that they're diverse. It's not all of the same thing. So, and that's what I was saying about there are a game changer in Scrum, is that they can address all of those problems that you're trying to solve. So they're not just going to be narrow for one single thing. I think that they can address most of those things here. Like the last answer is estimate to end the work of the client. That's also awesome. So there are, I believe, a lot of value for flow metrics within your Scrum teams, just like I've discovered for the last 5 years. So next slide is, for me, what have I been trying to solve when I've been using flow metrics? And I like that grapefruit, orange, tangerine, all the way to a lemon and a lime, to maybe show you the difference between things that I've been trying to solve with flow metrics. So the first biggest thing that I've been trying to solve, or for my customer, is predictability. Usually when I try to show flow metrics in a Scrum environment, it's because people are tired of the story point, velocity / estimation conversation. And I'm in a DevOps environment where my teams are doing new features and getting support calls, and they have outages, and they're getting disrupted by other teams. In that environment, there's, for me, frustration around story points and velocity, and they're looking for a new way to solve that predictability issue. And this is where, for me, flow metrics has been a keen answer, a great answer. And by doing this, I've never thought about this, but I've become the project manager best friend. Me as a Scrum Master in those roles, when I show flow metrics to my Scrum Master, to my project manager, I become their best friend because now I'm giving them dates, even multiple dates of delivery, and I'm talking in days also. And they love that conversation. So I would have never imagined that I would have become the project manager best friend by using flow metrics. But for me, that has been a great nice to have. Another thing is I'm helping teams saving time and money. I've realized at the time of having that conversation around story points when we're doing planning poker has really been minimized by using flow metrics. So we're maybe saving an hour or two per developer inside of a sprint by not doing any more planning poker and using our historical data instead. Same thing if you're doing task or task splitting or writing a lot of tasks for your stories that you've got to complete, and you're putting estimates on them and tracking them on a sprint burn down. Well, all that kind of disappear if you're starting to use the work item age and your service level expectation. So for me, another key benefit was to save time and money in my teams. And once again, my project manager loves that because, hey, he's got a budget, and if I can save him, let's say $2,000 or euros per sprint, well, add that up in maybe 20 sprints during a year, he likes that. The third thing, and it comes back to one of the answers we had before, is transparency. I find that people who were hiding their real work behind estimates, well, that cannot be hidden anymore because following the age of an item and the cycle time of multiple items, well, you can't really hide behind that hard data, if I would say it this way. If it's taking you 5 days to complete something and you're now at the 8th day, well, you've got some hard data to, I'm going to say, argue about, instead of being, well, this was a 5 point and I was delayed because of this and that outages. Another place where I've seen this, and this was actually me at the beginning when I discovered flow metrics, is just doing agility. This is all new. I was just trying to apply agility, flow metrics to teams, but honestly, that was not working out because that was not a problem for them at that time. When I learned about flow metrics and tried to apply them in 2016, 2017, my teams were not ready for that. So they were kind of wondering, what are you doing, Louis? This is all fun and dandy, but why are you talking about this in retrospective or in planning? We don't really need it. So something I've learned is there's a moment, there's an opportunity where it's good to introduce them to your team. So also think about when would be the right moment or which problem you're really trying to solve with them with flow metrics. I'm going to pause here maybe for 30 seconds. Pavel or Marcin, is there any maybe questions or things that you're seeing in the chat before we move forward?
Nothing on the chat yet, and as you could see, people joined Menti, so I think we can move forward and leave the QA for the end of the meeting.
Okay. Oh, I think I went backward. So getting people on board, why should they change? So based on what I was saying and your experience on flow metrics, and I'm inviting everybody back to menti.com and typing in that code at the top, that is 24692792. What is for you the most important role in your organization to get on board when you're introducing flow metrics? At the bottom or on the quiz, you've got developers, management, project managers, and PMOs. You've got architects or even Scrum Masters. So I'd be kind of curious, when you've tried to implement flow metrics in your Scrum teams, where did you start? Who was the most important people that you reach out to implement them? So we've got 6 people who are saying developers, even 7. Thank you, by the way, for people who are voting. This makes it much more fun for me as the facilitator to have some feedback. So we've got 9 people who answered that. Mostly developers is your most important role. 2 people say project manager and 1 person says manager. This is going to be interesting. I'll then move to my own experience. When I try to get people on board, well, I usually start with managers. So this is going to be interesting maybe on the Q&A at the end. I usually start with managers because the flow metrics, from my experience, when I attach them in Scrum, I'll usually do some disruption within the team because I'm being much more transparent on how the work works. So I might get resistance to change from within the team. So to prevent or to catch that resistance up to the manager, the first thing I'll usually do is talk with the manager and tell them about my strategy of presenting flow metrics and implementing them in some specific teams where there might be some issues. So at least my manager knows what I'm going to do. And then if he hears about things, well, he'll know that I'm actually doing this and he can support me or not based on what I'm doing. But at least he knows what's going on and he can maybe back me up if things are not going my way. A second role that I usually try to get on board is the product owner. I can't stress enough how much I've become also the second best friend after the project manager of being the best friend of the product owner. I'm just showing him metrics that are talking in days instead of point. I first of all say that 1 hour conversation about what is a point, what does it mean, we'll do iteration, yada, yada, yada. I don't have that 1 hour conversation. I just show him the cycle time and the age and the throughput. And usually after 5 minutes, he or she gets it pretty fast. So I'm finally talking the language of the customer. And to be honest, I haven't had a lot of resistance from that person. He usually gets on board pretty fast. The third person I'm trying to get on board, and surprisingly, this is where I'm struggling the most, is agilists, trying to get other Scrum Master on board. It's getting less and less difficult, but in the past, when flow metrics were less popular, having a conversation with agilists about flow metrics replacing story points and velocity, I was going nowhere. It took me a lot of, I'm going to say, years to have conversation and to engage with other agilists that this is worth it. Even today, when I ping agilists, agile coaches, Scrum Master, I usually don't have that much traction with them when I talk about flow metrics. I'll get a lot of traction with management, product owners, management, but I'm still struggling to have a good ear from Scrum Masters. And finally, where I also struggle, and this is why it's interesting based on the survey results from the previous slide, is usually with developers, they're the last people I'm going to try to get on board. Once I've got everything covered around the Scrum team, then I'm ready to introduce them to flow metrics. One last thing I want to share with everybody is identifying risk. I've tried to implement or introduce flow metrics in teams, and it hasn't always worked well. So I want to take another 5 minutes to share with you my failures so that you don't have those same failures. So the first slide here kind of ties up with the previous section, which is who's going to get the most impacted by flow metrics, and let's make sure that person knows about it, and we've got that covered. So if it's your project manager / PMO because they're based on story points and we're going to change that for flow metrics, well, if that has a lot of impact on them, maybe let's go and have a conversation with them first. If it's more with developers because their annual review are linked to their productivity, well, maybe flow metrics will show a different aspect of their productivity. So maybe we want to talk about that with their manager first so that when we introduce them to the team, well, there won't be any preoccupations from developers on that new way of tracking work. So for me, when I go now into a customer, I really try to, if I implement flow metrics, who's going to get impacted the most first and how can I cover that person? Another risk that I try to identify is will I have to train people? Flow metrics seem really easy at first when we introduce them, but they do bring a lot of complications. For example, the tooling, how we run our meetings, the daily scrum and the sprint planning are impacted by flow metrics. The retrospectives might be different. So are people trained? And if not, how much will it cost to train them so that we can all be at the same level to have the same conversation about flow metrics? Another thing is the tooling. Do we have any good tooling around? There's a couple of great tools on the market. I'm going to say Actual Agile is your best solution. I'm the founder of PaceMkr, so I'll do a quick shameless plug here that PaceMkr is also an opportunity, but I can't stress enough also how Actual Agile is awesome. So do pick a tool also that will support your implementation. You can also do it by Excel. It's doable, but if you try to scale it, maybe you'll get some limitation from Excel, and then you have to move to an electronic tool also. So also think about what is your new tool set? You have budget for that tool set? That might be another thing that you want to think about. And lastly, another risk that I still discover, I'm not surprised anymore. I'm just ready for it when it happens. Is your organization ready for probabilities? For people who have used flow metrics, you know that it's all about forecasting with probabilities of events happening in the future. Well, I've had clients which the way that they work, they're just not open to that way of having a conversation about the future. Some customers do want a hard date. And if it's for, I don't know, Valentine's Day of 2023, well, will I make it to Valentine's Day? And that's all they want to hear. Well, if I want to talk about predictability, and there might be a 50% chance of getting our projects to Valentine's Day, well, that's not really meaningful for them. They just want a yes and no answer. So if I go into an organization that I could say are more based on predictability or probabilities, for example, your investments fund. So if you've got clients which are doing a lot of investment and they're good at planning in a few years where your portfolio of money is going to be, well, I found that these organizations are more ready to have that conversation about flow metric, because talking about forecasting with probabilities is already in their culture. And finally, how much will the confusion cost? In the sense that, and I'm going to take my own example in 2017 when I just dive into flow metrics. If I'm the only person talking about that, well, I'm going to put confusion in my Scrum team and maybe people around. And I might even lose some credibility from my own person because I'm the only one talking about that in that organization. So also think about if I'm trying to maybe talk about flow metrics, and we're 2 weeks here before it's something called the Black Friday in North America, where there's a huge sale before the holidays. Well, maybe it's not the right moment to talk about flow metrics because there are other business priorities. So maybe also think about when would be the right time to introduce them to your teams or your organization. And finally, I just can't stress this enough. Are your Kanban boards ready, or your Scrum boards ready for flow metrics? This is just an artist representation of a messy Kanban board. Do you have a good structured Kanban board in place so that you can track your user stories or bugs or technical debt? And how do you make a Kanban board clean? Well, the answer is already in the Kanban guide that was published by the folks from Pro Kanban in 2020. So the Kanban workflow properties are already in there on how you have to set up your Kanban board. And honestly, it's just 6 things that you've got to do to set up your Kanban board. So it's not really difficult to have a nice structured Kanban board to then track your flow metrics. And honestly enough, I've seen some customers do it in 2 months of setting up their boards correctly in 2 months. And at other places, it took them a whole year to have all of their board really well structured before applying flow metrics. So where am I going with this? You've heard about a bit about my pains and failures around this. Well, and even on the Agile survey where it's not really popular. So should I just drop the ball and retire and go back to just do Scrum mastering and hosting facilitating retrospective? The answer is no, because I really strongly believe that there are signs pointing us in the right direction. And the first one is, there's a great training called the Professional Scrum with Kanban that was published or launched in 2018 by scrum.org, which is kind of fascinating for people who might be following the history of Kanban and Scrum. They've been butting heads for maybe 10 years. So it was kind of interesting to see that in 2018, a Scrum.org organization decided to partner with Kanban expert and launch that training. So that's my first door of saying, okay, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. This is doable in Scrum. And what happens next? Well, there's a Scrum trainer in the UK called Andy Hiles. Great person. I would strongly recommend tracking him or following him on LinkedIn. He launched a book called Applying Scrum with Kanban, and I really love the subtitle, A Pointless Book. It took me about a year to get it, but when somebody said, Louis, it's a pointless book, he looked at me and, pointless book, and I finally figured it out. It means they're not going to talk about story points in that book, which is the joke in there. So that's launched in 2020. ProKanban.org also launched in 2020 with their 3 classes and their 3 assessments so that people can now validate their learning with Kanban. And the second class in there, the applying metrics for predictability, for me is another sign that, hey, these folks also want to talk about flow metrics. And lastly, just this summer, Will Seal, a professional Scrum trainer, and Daniel Vacanti launched flow metrics for Scrum team. So this was another third light in the tunnel saying, well, this is evolving. You know, if we're publishing this as a book, well, flow metrics are also getting traction in Scrum. So where do we want to strike a balance going forward? Well, in the last, I'm going to say 10, 15 years, we've talked about story points and velocity. There was even a movement about no estimate. Well, I find that for me, the next thing that is going to be the right thing is going to be flow metrics, which is going to be a balance between no more talk about estimates. We're really using our historical data. And for me, and this could be a conversation with people who really do like no estimate, I was having a hard time being more predictable with no estimate because I didn't have the tooling from flow metrics. So for me, my call is that in 2030, the normal way of doing Scrum will be with flow metrics / Kanban inside of your team. This is what I strongly believe. This is going to be just part of Scrum. And what you could do if you want to help me out, well, the next time you get an email from the Agile survey for the annual state of Agile, well, ask for flow metrics or ask why is flow metrics not in there? It's not in that list. I've for the last 5 years, when I answer that annual state of Agile, flow metrics are never in there. If I'm the only one asking why it's not in there, I'm not going to make it. So if you want to help me out, do ask the next time you get that survey why it's not in there. Or on LinkedIn, just ping the people who are doing that. Maybe somebody will wake up and say, yeah, we should put flow metrics in that survey. My last question for you, what else do you think you could do or that other people can learn from your own experience on how we can promote flow metrics in our industry? So one last time for everybody, I'll invite you to go on Menti, and what could you do to promote flow metrics besides maybe resharing Agile Labs' awesome talk about this topic? Yep, start using them and show their work, showing the historical data. And yes, I love how we can compare them with story points. That's actually something I do. Now, when I get to a customer and flow metrics is the right conversation to have, I'll usually compare the story points and the cycle time for all the story points, and usually there's no correlation. Apply it, implement them in teams and organization, implement them in the right way, prove that they're working, use them and show their pros. Yes, totally. Yes, we should actually just start working on them and use them. Totally. I totally agree. We are done folks, that would be my talk for what is flow metrics, my experience report, and how I've used them. I think, Pavel, maybe we'd like to turn the microphone around to the audience.
Yes, so thank you very much for this part of the meeting.